Good morning. How is everyone doing today? Good morning to those of you that are watching online. We're so glad that you are here and participating with us. And so I get the privilege to speak today, and I figured for my topic, I would pick something that's in line. Past couple of weeks we've been talking about things like unity and gospel, things that are, very unifying for the church and something that's makes you feel good after you talk about it. So I figured that I would continue that theme and that trend, and today I would talk about giving. And so before I do that, and before we turn to our passage in 2 Corinthians 8, I wanted to tell you all a story really quick. When I was a kid, on Saturdays, my dad and I would go and kill time. We would drop my little brother off for drum practice, and he would be practicing his drums, doing all those things, and we would go to different stores and places around town together, father and son, to kill time. And on one of those Saturdays, I spotted something out of the corner of my eye as a little kid that I knew I needed. It would change my life. It would complete everything. It was a lava lamp. And I wanted this lava lamp so badly as a kid, but the problem was I didn't have any money. And my dad sure wasn't going to give me any for a lava lamp that he believed that I didn't need. And so I found myself at a crossroads, at an impasse. What was I going to do? And luckily, I had family. I had an aunt who allowed me to help her around her cafe and do some things to earn some money to try and earn this lava lamp, to pay for this lava lamp that I wanted so desperately. And I'd worked so tirelessly to get, in my mind, as a 6-year-old kid. But before I was able to buy that, my parents stressed to me the importance of giving my tithe, to give my offering to the church. And as a 6-year-old, when you are presented with this option to part with money that you felt you worked so hard for and that you had so little of, to give to the church, it was something that I had to wrestle with as a 6-year-old. Do I take it all and get this lava lamp, get all the things that I want with this money? Or do I give it to the church? And my parents made it clear that it wasn't their choice, that it was my choice to make for myself. It was my choice whether or not I gave that money to God, how much I gave, and when I gave it. But my parents stressed to me that giving to God was important. And I'll finish this story later. I want you to hang on the edge of your seat. Did he give him the money? Did he not give the money? But it leaves us with a question. If based on what my parents said is true, and as we look in this passage, this question, is giving to God important? Is it really important? If it is important, then what did that mean for me as a 6-year-old kid? What does that mean for us this morning? If giving to God truly is important, what does that mean for me? What did it mean for me then? What does it mean for me now? So, before we finish that story, let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and we'll see if Paul can shed some light on the question at hand. 2 Corinthians 8:1 reads, "Now, brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God, which has been given in the churches of Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much urging for the favor of participating in the support of the saints. And this is not all we expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. And so we urged Titus that as he had previously made a beginning, so he would also complete in you this gracious work as well. But just as you abound in everything, in faith, utterance, and knowledge, and in all earnestness and in all love we inspired in you, see that you abound in this gracious work also. I am not speaking this as a command, but as a proving through the earnestness of others, the sincerity of your love also." So what's happening here? What's happening with this? Well, first, we acknowledge who is Paul writing to. He's writing to the Corinthians. He's writing to them and putting in the middle of this letter, this passage, talking about the collection that he was taking up for the church in Judea. Paul's taking up this collection, and it's something that some of you maybe not be super familiar with. For some of you, maybe you do, because it comes up over and over again. My argument, my thought with this is something that wasn't just passing lip service to a good deed that made Paul feel good about himself. It wasn't simply a second thought, that this was something that was very central to Paul's ministry as he went to the churches throughout the Mediterranean, as he's collecting for the church in Judea. It would have consumed his time, it would have consumed his energy, it would have consumed his resources. So why would Paul spend so much time and energy and resources taking up this collection for someone else, to take up something for people in a completely different country, in a different place, people that would have been in conflict with one another at a point in time, people that Paul himself struggled with as he wrestled with the church when they talked about things such as circumcision and what were the Gentiles to do versus what were the Jews to do. And this is something that Paul talks about over and over again. We see it in Acts 11, we see it in Galatians, we see it in 1 Corinthians and Philemon and Romans. And so we see this idea of the collection, we see this theme come up over and over again. And to be clear, the final outcome of what happened with this money and everything else, it's uncertain. We can speculate about what happened and what Paul did with that. But what I'm more concerned about isn't necessarily the end result, but what motivated, what were the intentions of this effort by Paul. And I read a great book by a person named Kelly Capac recently who actually wrote quite a bit on this topic, on this passage even. And in his book, For God So Loved, He Gave, he is identifying three major things that I want to talk about this morning that are motivating Paul, that are pushing Paul to do this thing, to urge this church in Corinth to participate in this collection. So the first goal is kind of the obvious goal, the one that for most people isn't really hard to connect the dots. The first goal is for Paul to care for the poor and the less fortunate. And in Judea, as you read in places like Acts, this church is facing famine, it's facing struggle. There are people that are in dire need. And Paul's first goal, one of the first goals that I want to talk about is this care for the poor and the needy. And this is obviously something that I think is easy for us to think about and talk about. It's something that's popular in our culture today. But obviously Paul, he wants to care for the people that God cares about, widows and orphans, the oppressed. And God gives the Israelites laws in the Old Testament, and we've gone through places like Exodus, and you read farther in like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, where he's giving the Israelites laws, reminding them to not be like the Egyptians, to care for the people that they didn't care for. And this is exactly what Paul is doing here. It's what he's urging the church to do, to care for those who are in need. And we've seen this play out throughout history. As Christians, we see things like hospitals and food banks, and we see the way that our care for the poor and the vulnerable and the least of these has expressed itself in different ways throughout even modern American life. And so this probably isn't a difficult argument to make. I'm sure none of you are going to disagree with what I'm saying. And obviously, I could just go through this passage and we could spend all of our time talking about this. I could end it here and it would be a good enough message. It would feel good. But I think that more than simply caring for material needs, I think there's something greater happening here. I think there's something deeper. There's something additional to meeting material needs of the church that was in desperate need. I think that with this collection, I think that with our money and our gifts, I think that God can do a lot more than simply meet material needs. And I think that Paul would argue the same thing. And I think that it's clear when you read in the passage, he says, "But just as you abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge, and in all earnestness and in the love we inspired you, see that you abound in this gracious work also." He's equating this work, this collection, with something more than just a monetary transaction. It's simply not an exchange of goods for Paul. It's something that's equating with this faith and this work that has already been happening in the church in Corinth. He's bringing this up to a different level. And so I don't want to downplay giving to the poor and the needy and the oppressed. I don't want to downplay financial and tangible needs. Even us here at a church have to pay utilities and electricity and all those other things. But I think that with our giving, I think that with the giving at the Corinthian church, there's more happening than just this first goal. So that brings us, what is the second goal? What's another goal that Paul would have for this collection? I think that's something that is simply just as important. This collection, in an odd way and in a unique way, promotes unity among the church. And this is something that Paul admits openly to the church in Corinth, and he wants them to be the church in Corinth, to be united on this goal, on this ideal, to give this money. He's not addressing one single person in this to front load the gift. He's urging the whole church to come forward in this gift. But obviously for Paul, the gift isn't just about those that are giving, but also those that are receiving. So this gift, obviously, in one way, can unite this church in Corinth, but also, I think, and many people, as they write in different commentaries, would say that Paul's hope for this is to also unite the Jews and the Gentiles together. The Gentiles, in sacrificing and giving up themselves to the Jews, show them, the Jews and the church in Judea, that they are united in their love for Christ, their love for one another. That when they give this gift, that it actually, in an odd way, brings together the body, not just one church, not just the Corinthians, not just the Judeans, but even the Macedonians that he's referencing. Because as he references the church in Macedonia, he doesn't say, so-and-so in Macedonia gave us a lot of money, and so he was able to kind of pick up the slack where all of them, the church in Macedonia, urged him, begged him for them to participate, not for themselves only, but also to benefit the church in Judea. All of them were in agreement. They approached Paul about this opportunity that they had. They knew that they would miss out on something that Paul was doing, that God was doing, if they didn't give. And perhaps even the church in Macedonia realized that this was going to bring them and the Jews in Judea, the church there, together in a unique way and be something special. And this is something that Paul doesn't want them to miss out. He doesn't want any of these churches that he's going to and visiting to miss out on this opportunity. And obviously, this is something that we've talked about recently in the unity of the body. I feel like there's lots of things that we can do as a church. There's lots of things that Paul urges churches to do throughout his letters to promote this unity. And I think that this giving, this unity, was just another act of God's grace and his gift to those churches in that time and that place. So we see the church coming together through their giving, united in what they're going to do, but also what they're going to be able to do with this church in Judea. I think that Paul is desiring for the church as a whole, the church universal, to be united in this way, to be united in their giving even. And so what is another goal? What's the third goal that we can see Paul address, we can see Paul talk about in his collection? And for me, this is something that I think is hugely important. On top of all the other things, there's a certain participation in the kingdom. This is something that the Macedonians, that they themselves are begging. They begged Paul for the opportunity to participate in this collection, not simply so that they could just give up their money. It's clear they don't have much to give. They don't have much that they can sacrifice, but they want to participate in something bigger than themselves. They hungered to be active participants in what God was doing. If we truly are called to follow Christ and to be more than simply bystanders, and I think that part of what the kingdom life is, part of what the gospel is, when Jesus comes and he interacts with his apostles and disciples, it's a life of participation. Jesus constantly throughout the Gospels is calling his followers to do something, to do more, to follow him, to take up their cross, to go and to spread the good news. And whatever it is, wherever you find it, Jesus is inviting us into something greater to participate in. From the very beginning of Genesis, from the garden, all the way through Revelation, we're invited as we enter into the kingdom, into a bigger story, a bigger picture, into God's story, what God's doing, not just in our own lives, but what God's doing in this world, in our families, in our communities. And so the Macedonians, Paul brings them up. He brings them up as this example for the Corinthians to show them, what does it look like to participate in the kingdom? What does it look like to participate in the kingdom through giving? For them, it was to sacrifice something of themselves for the good of someone else. But I think that they're also recognizing that by participating in what God's doing, it's not them themselves that are doing this act, but it's something that God is doing in them or through them. Paul highlights in verse 4 and 5, they desire to be part of the collection. Then they first gave to God before anyone else. It wasn't simply that they wanted to be a part of a story. They wanted to make the footnotes in Paul's letters. They wanted that recognition, but they truly understood that what they were doing wasn't just something that Paul was doing, but something that God was doing, something greater. It wasn't simply just about giving a monetary gift, and that's why when they give, they first give to God. What they give to God exactly, I can't say for certain, but I think that it's a lot of prayer, a lot of intentionality, a lot of discernment, obviously setting aside everything that they had to make sure that what they were doing for the right reasons. And so Paul makes it clear that our giving apart from God, our giving without giving to God first, acknowledging what God's doing first, it does not have the same weight. It doesn't have the same significance. That as we enter into our gifts, our prayer, our worship, as we do that, we think about God first. We acknowledge God first. We acknowledge what He's doing, what He will do with our gifts and our time and our money and our resources first and foremost, because otherwise we're simply doing good things for the sake of doing good things, or we're giving money because we can, or we've been told that we should. And this collection is more than simply a financial transaction. It's acknowledgement that God's kingdom permeates everything that we do, everything that we see and touch, and everything that we're a part of. And that even in our giving, that we're participating in the kingdom. So Paul continues to make his appeal to the Corinthians. He makes it clear that this gift, it's a continuation of the grace that God has given, that God has extended to them. Ignoring it, not participating in it, it's somehow missing out on God's grace, something that we don't deserve. But through our participation and our sacrifice, he's telling the Corinthians that this in and of itself is a gift. That in our giving we receive something. We begin to experience the kingdom in fresh, new ways when we give. So Paul doesn't beg the church in Corinth for money. He's just painting a picture for this church. He's painting a picture for the Corinthians that they're going to miss out on something that the Macedonians were able to participate in. And that their giving wasn't about them in any way, not truly. It reflects so much more about our world than just monetary transactions. What Paul is challenging is the notion that their money is about them, that giving is simply building others up at my expense, sacrificing so that someone else can get ahead. If I could sum up everything, I would say that the way that I give, or what Paul is urging this church, the way that I give reveals the way that I see the kingdom and how I fit into the kingdom. The focus of the passage isn't the collection. It's not an amount. It's a picture of obedience. It's a picture of obedience of one church that's willing or hoping to spur on the obedience of another. Paul is using the Macedonian story to help the Corinthians see God, their possessions, and themselves in a new way. So let's go back and rewind. We'll go back and finish my story, what I started this out with. How did 6-year-old me see this kingdom? How did I see the economy of the kingdom? And what did I do with the money that I'd had? And before I go on, I really want to make it clear that this isn't about me, trying to paint myself in a way that's greater than I actually am, or trying to show how spiritual or how pious I was even as a 6-year-old. That's not the goal. That's not the point. But I do believe that the Spirit was working on me even then in a unique way. And so as a 6-year-old, I would often on Sundays find myself visiting my pastor that I had when I grew up. I went into his office on a Sunday morning. And I took 20 cents in an envelope, and I gave that to my pastor. And then I went on and bought the lava lamp, and life was complete. Life was perfect. But little did I know that my pastor would save that envelope. And that 10 years later, during a sermon kind of like this one, but in all honesty, probably just a hair better than this one, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out an envelope with 20 cents in it. And he told everyone about receiving that envelope, about how much that meant for him to see a child who understood the kingdom in a way that some other people might not understand, and to see a child who knew that giving
was not about himself. It was not about the money. It was about what God wanted to do with that obedience. And that child wanted to be a part of God's kingdom in a profound way, in a new way. And he didn't want to wait. He didn't want to wait to participate in God's kingdom and what God was doing in his life. He didn't want to wait to participate in what God was doing in that church. He didn't want to wait to participate with what God was doing in his heart and with those people. He wanted to experience it then and now. And I can't say that that kid fully understood the kingdom. I don't think that that child fully understood what God was going to do with that obedience. But just like Paul used that story with the Macedonians, my pastor used that story to highlight that the kingdom economy is different than this world. He used that story to highlight the fact that giving, even just a little, can result in you receiving so much more. And that to miss out on that participation is something that some people will miss out on. But my pastor then didn't want people to miss out on that. I don't want you to miss out on that. And so today, I'm not going to go ahead and pass baskets. That's not how we're going to finish the message, by taking up a collection or anything else. I believe that this story is more than that. It's definitely more than simply just passing a plate and taking up an offering, although that's all well and good. I'd like us to think, as we right now here in 2022 at Grace Community Church in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, think about the kingdom, the economy that's different than ours, that's different maybe than the way we've understood it, to think about our gifts, to think about our time, ourselves in a new way. I'm asking you to wrestle with what does this mean for you personally? What does it mean for you to participate in the kingdom? I'm with Paul. I'm not going to command. I don't think any one of us would command that you give or do anything. I think that God in us desires a willing heart. And with that receptive, willing heart, that he can do so much more than what we can even do with our own gifts. And so this first takeaway is really to just think about the ways that you can participate in what we are doing here, what God is doing here at Grace Community Church. For some of you, that may be giving for the first time, that may be just giving in a new way with a new mindset. For others, it can be reassessing what you give or anything, but regardless of what it is and regardless of how you do it, I urge you to pray about the ways that you can give and the way that you can participate in the kingdom through your giving and through your sacrifice here at Grace. The second thing, the second takeaway, maybe even more so than simply just giving a gift, I think participating through serving here at Grace is a great way to be involved in the kingdom and in something that's happening, something that God is doing. I think that we strongly believe that God is changing people's lives here. We're spending lots of money, lots of time and energy to put up a building for kids to change their lives, hopefully, and to continue to change people's lives through all the different ministries that we have at this church. But the truth is, and I think it's easy for me to say this, we can't do any of this without your participation, without your help, without you serving and volunteering in all of these different areas. And I think that God has his own measure of grace and his own ways that he continue to pour into your lives as you serve, maybe in new ways, maybe in the same ways, maybe it's encouraging others to serve. But I would highly encourage you to find anyone here on staff, and talk to them about the ways that you can serve and the way that you can participate in what God's doing here at Grace through your volunteering, through your serving. The last thing, maybe to me, the most important thing to take away from all of this is that all of this message, all of what Paul is doing, all of what I am doing, it's all about our personal stories and the ways that God is changing our lives, the way that God is transforming us, the way that God was transforming the church in Macedonia, the way that God has transformed my own life. And so the final takeaway is to learn how to tell your stories, to talk about your stories with others. And these stories can have profound impact on those around you. And so I'm begging you and I'm imploring with you to tell your stories to the people that you have influence with. Tell your stories to your coworkers, your friends, especially to your own family, to your kids. It's never too early. It's never too late. It's always in God's timing, but learn how to tell these stories yourselves to the people around you. And so all of this, I don't think that it's extremely profound. It's not radically difficult to understand, but I think that participation in the kingdom is life-giving and it's life-changing. And I think that God does so much more with the ways that we give up ourselves and our money and our time than we could ever fully understand and fully fathom. And we don't give to earn a spot in this kingdom. We don't give so that we can enter into this kingdom. We've already entered in to God's kingdom. He's already made a way. He's already come before us. He just wants us to participate fully, deeper, more complete than we can understand. But truly, there's only really one way that all of this can be true, that we can participate in this kingdom, that we can be a part of this kingdom. Because you see, Paul, he's not ending the passage with verse 8 here. He's ending his plea with the Corinthians in verse 9. He's centralizing it around something else. He's centralizing this giving, what the Macedonians are doing around Jesus. Because 2 Corinthians 8:9, it reads, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich." You see, all of this, our time, our giving, our sacrifices, they're always going to pale in comparison with that of Jesus Christ. What Jesus did at the cross was his gift to us, his abundant grace towards us. His life was a gift that he gave freely and willingly that we did not deserve. Not only did we not deserve that gift, but he asks for nothing for us to receive this gift.
We deserve nothing from God, and we had nothing to offer him but our sin. But on the cross, he took our sin and he gave us his life. This can be summed up so well in a verse that's probably quoted far too often. John 3:16-17 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him." God loved us so much that he gave. What better reason can there be for us to give than the fact that all of our giving comes in light of what God gave at the cross, someone who saw fit to give everything he had for us. And so it's with that knowledge and with that understanding as followers of Christ that we come to the table and we extend the generosity of God, even here today in this moment, through communion. God gave us so much, and he loved us so much that he prepared a table for us that even on the eve of his own betrayal and death, he prepared a meal, and he makes room for you at the table. Regardless of what you've done, regardless of the mistakes that you've made, he made a way for you. Jesus knew that the disciples would have nothing to offer. They had nothing to offer him but betrayal, abandonment, and death. And so some of you may come to that table today, just as the apostles did. You may feel like you have nothing to offer. You may feel unworthy. But I'm here to tell you that Jesus' message never changed. It hasn't changed. Luke 22:15-20, Jesus says to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I shall never eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, "Take this and share it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the kingdom of God comes." And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup, which is poured out for you, is the new covenant of my blood." So, come to the table as God calls you, as God leads you, with open hands and open hearts to receive God's grace as you enter into communion. We have communion on either side of the worship center. We have gluten-free over here off to the side. Come as you feel led.